Hello and welcome to the Quietly Visible podcast. I'm your host, Carol Stewart, founder of The Bounding Solutions and author of Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. And this is the podcast for introverted women who want to thrive as leaders and in life, as well as those of you who want to lead as your authentic self. Now, today, the topic that we're talking about is sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. In the UK, it's said that around 40% of women have experienced some form of unwelcome sexual behaviour in the workplace. And speaking to my guests, this is probably consistent with what's happening in the US as well. And so my guest today is Brittany Stevens, and she's a multi-award winning partner at Phillips Associates PLLC, and she's a dedicated advocate for employees who have experienced sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation in the workplace. So hello, Brittany, and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to a meaningful and thoughtful discussion.
Yes, me too, me too. So this is the first time we're actually discussing this. We've talked about other sort of harassment, bullying, but not sexual harassment. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So before we begin, let's tell us a little bit more about who Brittany is.
Sure. So I'm an employment discrimination attorney representing employees who have experienced sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation at work. And much of my work involves supporting people at incredibly vulnerable moments, helping them make sense of what happened, find their voice, and move forward with clarity and dignity. I care deeply about the human side of advocacy and how power dynamics shape whether people feel safe speaking up. I love what I do, and I'm a partner at the law firm at Phillips Associates, and all we do is employee side sexual harassment discrimination work. So it's good work we do.
Great. And it's very important work as well, because, this is something, and particularly sort of looking at it from the aspect of women. I know men experience it as well, because I think that same report that I read about it mentioned about the 40%. It said, I think it was something like, I think I've seen figures of something like 18% of men. So it's still significantly more women that are experiencing this. So it is an important topic, because I think that probably a lot of it actually goes unreported.
Right. I was just, thinking about that as well, right? Because such a large, and I don't even know if problem's the right word, but, people are scared to complain, right? People are scared to report sexual
Mhm.
harassment at their workplace. So, I'm curious about those statistics. They're probably obviously only the people that actually do report them.
Yeah, yeah. And out of curiosity, what made you go into this area of law?
So I took an employment discrimination class in law school, and it was the one class that really spoke to me. I was very interested in it. A lot of the classes in law school are pretty dry, and I was immediately drawn to it. And I made it my mission to try and get an internship in employment discrimination after that class. And I really knew, I was lucky enough to know after that class that this is probably what I wanted to focus on. And
Mhm.
after I graduated law school, I landed an employment discrimination job, and I realized I was quite good at it and that it was like the right fit for me. I do come
Mhm.
from a family of lawyers, like my parents are both lawyers, so I I always had a feeling that maybe I would be a lawyer someday, but I just didn't know what kind of lawyer. I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to be on like the individual side and not the corporation or company side. But it wasn't until that class that really spoke to me that made me realize this is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, that's good. And so when it comes to sexual harassment and women experiencing it. So what do you think is the reason why we're still seeing such high numbers? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, there's a lot of reasons. I think a lot of it goes to companies and their lack of enforcing policies and procedures to ensure
Hmm.
that this stuff just doesn't happen to begin with. Or what happens is they have these policies and procedures where they say we have a zero tolerance sexual harassment policy here, but it's not actually implemented.
Hmm.
Another thing that we see a lot is companies protecting their high level, C-suite executives or some of the bad actors who are maybe known to sexually harass lower level employees. And instead
Hmm.
of terminating these individuals who may be a rainmaker for the company, they continue to employ them and really condone and acquiesce their bad behavior. So I think it's really up for the employers to start, enforcing their policies and procedures so that people can stop getting sexually harassed at work. But I think also people are human, and I don't know if this is ever going to go away.
Yeah, and what you said there about more senior people and the junior sort of people. I remember doing a talk for some early career lawyers a few years ago, and some of the young women came up to me after and said that they had problems with some of the senior lawyers, making sexual advances, harassing them, but because they were, dependent on getting their training contracts or getting appointed after they'd completed their training contracts, they were scared to speak up about it. And
Right.
is that something you've seen? I mean, not necessarily with lawyers, but with women who are in their very early careers, um, and then they're too scared to say anything because they're worried about how it's going to impact their career.
Definitely. I mean, particularly when the power dynamic is so large, right? If you're talking
Hmm.
about someone who's, it's their first job and they're really, trying to, just start their career trajectory, and the
Hmm.
person sexually harassing them is a higher level individual, then yes, it makes it even more terrifying to complain. But I'd even say, regardless of the person's position who's getting sexually harassed, it's always a scary thing to complain. And that's because there is this real threat of retaliation. And that the second that you complain about sexual harassment, your job's at risk, right? Maybe you will get terminated or demoted, or you'll be treated differently because you'll be seen as, the complainer. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of reasons why people fear complaining to begin with. And, to just even add on to that, when we're talking about the power dynamics of a higher level individual, a lot of times companies protect them. So
Hmm.
it's scary to complain about those individuals because they fear no one will even believe me.
Yeah. And so what could, regardless of what stage they're at in their career, what can a woman do if she is being subjected to sexual harassment? What would you suggest that they how would you suggest that they go about dealing with it?
Well, there's, a few things. I think obviously talking to a professional, right, like a lawyer is a good idea, right? Because
Hmm.
lawyers know the law and, they can help you and navigate a way out of it. But human resources is another department that people have, another avenue for employees to complain to. The problem is that, human resources really is the employer, right? So it's supposed to help protect the employees, but I think we all know in actuality it doesn't. But a lot of clients document things, keep like, journals or contemporaneous notes or recordings, and have something that they can kind of back it up with. Not that that's all the time necessary, but it does help, right? Having this documentation and feeling as if, okay, when I am ready to complain, I'll be able to corroborate it with, some documentation, and then maybe the company will take remedial action after I complain. So
Yeah.
I think protecting yourself is important.
Okay. And yes, I was going to ask you about that in terms of what evidence they should gather, so that they've got something to support the claims that they're making.
Right. I mean, so a lot of times our clients come with like witnesses, right, who maybe have seen some of the sexual harassment. And these could be witnesses in real time, people that have actually seen, a physical touching or a comment. Sometimes these are witnesses that our clients spoke to after the fact, right? Maybe they were harassed and then they were crying and they spoke to someone immediately thereafter. And even just having
Mhm.
that witness could be very powerful, right? Because it's in real time. Sometimes we have text messages or, recordings or emails. But, I think another powerful piece is like the written complaint too, right? When someone actually complains to the company and has documentation of a complaint, it's really hard for a company to overlook that, right? It's not even just a verbal complaint. I'm
Mm.
talking about a written complaint.
Yeah.
Because at that time, the company really should be doing a thorough investigation into the allegations. And it may shock you how sometimes companies do not do that. And they kind of just, um, just tell the client, oh, we'll handle it. And then nothing's actually done.
Mm. And is it wise for the woman to confront the perpetrator, or
I
is
think it,
it?
yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, that's a hard thing to answer, right? Because some of our
Hmm.
clients are in positions where it might be like a real threat, right? There may be like a sexual assault. And I think everyone needs to kind of evaluate what their situation is.
Hmm.
Saying no to someone doesn't automatically have them stop their behavior. There is obviously power to that. Maybe sometimes they will realize, oh, you're not interested in this, I'll stop. But that's not always the case.
Hmm. Yeah. And so in terms of what you do, tell us about how you, well, yeah, if you talk us through how the process works. And I mean, I know you're in the US, I'm in the UK, but there will be, a lot of similarities in how things are dealt with legally anyway. So
Mhm.
what's the process? So somebody contacts you. Is that how it works? Someone will reach out to you and contact you and say that, I'm experiencing this. Talk us through
Right.
the process.
Sure. Yeah. So we get, people calling us about what's going on at their workplace. And we do an intake call. We figure out if it's something that we can help them with. We look at, multiple factors if it's something that we can help them with, depending on the facts, the liability, damages. But if it is something that we're able to step in and assist the client with, then, we get involved by reaching out to their employer, either their current employer if they're still working there, or their
Mm,
previous employer. And, we try and figure out how to either get the client out, rather, maybe a resignation, or try and negotiate some kind of resolution, some kind of settlement for the client. People always think that you automatically go to court, right? Like you become a client and you have to file your case in court. The reality is that, here in the US, and I'm in New York,
mm,
a lot of these matters do get resolved before the court system. And there's a lot of reasons why. Court it's public, it's Not always where justice is served here in America. And a lot of times having some kind of resolution where attorneys get involved is in actuality better for the clients because it's on
Mm.
their own terms. And if we're not able to come to some kind of resolution, then the next step could be filing in court. And I'm a litigator, so I file a lot of matters in court, but it really would depend on even what the client wants. A lot of
Hmm.
clients don't want to go to court and have this be public. Some clients do. So we really listen to each individual client as to what it is that they want and then what it is that makes sense for their individual matter.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so someone who is experiencing this, address it with HR initially, like you mentioned. If they're finding that they're not getting satisfaction, then maybe seek legal advice. That's the best way for them to go about it.
Yeah, we get that a lot, right? People complain to human resources and nothing happens, right?
Hmm.
Maybe they are still stuck working with the harasser, or maybe there's no thorough investigation. Or a lot of times what we see is that they do an investigation and they come back to the individual, the potential client, and say, we did an investigation and it's unsubstantiated. So, go back to work, right? So, a lot of times that's when people call me because they're frustrated that
Mm.
they're maybe not believed or that there is not appropriate remedial action after they do come forward.
Hmm. Yeah. And from your experience, how do you see this impacting the women that you work with, on a sort of like personal level, emotionally as well?
I think that, I can't tell you how many times I speak to someone. Maybe it's the first time they call, or they're telling someone that they've been sexually harassed, and they have someone who will
Hmm.
listen to them, who will, have empathy towards them, who will believe them, and just how grateful they are to just have someone who is on their side. And, I think that that's, I feel so grateful that I get to be that person for my clients, right? That I'm one of the first people that they maybe even have spoken to about this.
Hmm.
And that's really like the first step sometimes of feeling like even a little bit empowered. Okay, I made this step by even calling a lawyer and telling them my story. Maybe now I'm ready to tell the company, whether it's through myself or whether it's through, my lawyer. So I think, you know, taking that first step, it's a big
Hmm.
step, but I really try and help navigate and put as much on my plate so that my client doesn't have to really do much.
Yeah. And so when they've contacted you and you've contacted the employer, and there's no sort of satisfactory, way of resolving it, is that when you would then pursue court proceedings?
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, here we have what's called like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it's a federal agency that investigates sexual harassment and discrimination complaints. And if you want to
Hmm.
file in federal court, you have to first kind of go through that hoop. So, there sometimes we go straight to court depending on, what laws we're suing under. Sometimes we file in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission first. But, and sometimes the client decides I don't want to move forward at this point anymore, right? Like feel I feel okay knowing that I spoke up, that they have received a complaint against me, but at this point, I don't want a public filing because
Hmm.
some people understand that, while there should not be future retaliation against them, people are scared that maybe their future employer will Google them and find that, or maybe they moved on
Hmm.
to a new company and they don't want that out there. And, at that point, whatever the client decides, we're okay with. We very much understand why someone would not want to make a public filing
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah, and I'm just it's going through my mind that figure of 40%, and I think that is shockingly high, isn't it? It shouldn't be that high, 40%. Yes, um, it's a figure, it's like nearly half the women in
Right,
employment are
right,
experiencing this.
right,
It's
right. But I feel like sexual harassment is found within every type of job, every type of sector, right?
mhm,
You can be every type of like income bracket, right? Like it really doesn't discriminate it within like, within itself, right? So
mhm,
it sounds very, very high, but at the same time, we see people getting sexually harassed, at all types of jobs. So,
mhm.
it's not just happening, at the car wash, it's also happening, at the C suite level.
Yes, yes, it is. It is sad that the figures are that high, and that it is still we've got all these. We've got over here, we've got the Equalities Act. You have legislation over there that are supposed to protect, but yet these things still happen. Um,
Right. Yes, we've made significant movements. So I'm in New York, and like, the New York laws are very favorable for employees. I'm lucky to be able to practice in New York, because what's considered sexual harassment here is very different than what's considered sexual harassment, let's say in like Florida, right? Or in
oh,
Texas.
really? Yeah.
So here we have like federal laws, which are not as favorable. But then we also have state specific laws. And then, I'm in New York City specific laws. So depending where you're practicing really makes a big difference as to
Hmm.
whether what you're calling about is even sexual harassment.
Mm.
So, that's why it's very important to speak to someone that actually practices in that state, right? Because what can be deemed sexual harassment in New York may not be deemed sexual harassment in Florida.
Right. And have you got any examples of how, what's considered sexual harassment in New York but not in Florida?
Well, I only practice in New York, but I will say that New York City has a very low bar, right? So maybe even some stray comments that are sexually suggestive
Hmm.
could be deemed sexual, could be enough to rise to the level of sexual harassment in New York City, whereas maybe those same comments may not rise to the level of sexual harassment in Florida. And I know that's not a specific example, but it just kind of showing you that, even a few comments, you
Mm.
may still be able to even bring a lawsuit against an employer for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find that interesting how laws across the different states in the US can be so different.
Yes. Oh, so
Mm.
different. So different.
Yeah, yeah. All dependent on where you live, what state you live in, will
Right.
I mean, and then something like this, something which New York considers sexual harassment may not be considered elsewhere.
Right.
Um,
And then even, taking that a step further too, right? Even if it's considered sexual harassment, the jury pool of that state, right? So if you're going to trial and you're putting on a sexual harassment trial, the people who are listening in New York City are going to be very different than people who are listening in like, Lubbock, Texas, right?
mhm,
So,
mhm.
constantly thinking about where your case will be heard, right? That
Yeah,
impacts not even just liability but also damages and what we see with verdicts.
wow. Yeah. Um, and so how, in terms of sort of like advocacy for increasing awareness about this, or um just yes, that increased awareness about talking about how can we increase awareness, to make women feel safe or help women to feel safe about speaking up. Any thoughts or
Right.
suggestions?
I think just, knowledge is power. I think people knowing their rights is
Hmm.
significant. Um, you know, if you make a complaint of sexual harassment, you cannot get terminated for making that complaint. That's retaliation. And I think people sometimes don't even realize that, right? Yes, an employer can terminate you for something else, and they could pretend that they're really terminating you because you were late that day, when in
Hmm.
actuality, their reason is just pretextual, and the real reason they're
Hmm.
terminating you is because of your complaint. But even knowing that there are protections for you, and that retaliation is unlawful, and what retaliation may look like, because it's not always as obvious as just a termination, right? Sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's, getting a bad performance review after you complain, or it's being excluded from meetings, or having job responsibilities taken away from you. So I think people even knowing about their rights and what retaliation looks like, um, can help, because it makes people just understand what to even look for.
Hmm.
But, I wish I had a real solution. I really think a lot of it's on companies to enforce their policies and procedures, and to create a culture that is not toxic at work, and a culture that invites people to feel comfortable to complain. Because if the work environment is toxic, and people don't even feel safe to complain to begin with, then, that's not a company anyone's going to be wanting to work at. They're not going to be attracting good talent anyway. But I really push it to the companies to start enforcing their policies, and to do the right thing when someone does complain.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the retaliation, that they can't be someone can't be dismissed because they put in a complaint. Um, but employees may pick up on something else and use that. Do you see that at all in your work with where
Yes,
somebody
we see it all the time. I think you know the company needs to point to a non-retaliatory reason to terminate a client, right? There has to be their legal defense.
Hmm.
So they'll start nitpicking and looking at, maybe some performance deficiencies that were never brought up before our client complained, or, all of a sudden they have issues with lateness, but, our client never had issues before, right? Or so, there are ways to work around that.
Hmm.
We call it a pretextual reason for termination under the law. So, yes, I mean, an employer must point to this non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory reason for their legal defense. But, you know, I think temporal proximity, and, kind of being able to rebut their reason for termination is what we look to for on our side.
Okay. Okay, so this is something, and it's an interesting topic, and I think it's something that women do need to be aware of, and men as well, because like I said, men can be subject to it as well. But yeah, so before we wrap up, any final thoughts or comments that you want to share?
Um, I would just say that, obviously sexual harassment is still very prevalent, but if you're like an employer listening to this, or, you're in human resources, I just encourage you to just, try and enforce your policies and procedures, and try and like invite, an environment where people feel comfortable to complain. And if you're someone that's, been experiencing sexual harassment, I think you should just, think understand that you do have rights and protections, and
Mhm.
they're state specific if you're here in the United States listening. But even just speaking to a lawyer or human resources about what your rights are is a good first step.
Okay, so listeners do take that advice. And I know you're based in New York, and we do get a lot of listeners based in the US and in New York. So for UK listeners, I'm afraid that you won't be able to reach out to us to get witness support. But for those of you, for those that are based in New York who may want to find out more about how you can support them, what's the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, I encourage you to go on the Phillips Associates website. You can look me up. I'm Brittany Stevens. My email's right on my page. You can also follow me on LinkedIn on Brittany Stevens Alper. I'm trying to post more to spread awareness as to what I'm doing at my practice, give everyone some tips and tricks for practitioners, and sharing some stories of real life examples of some things that my clients have experienced. So follow me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, we'll put the link to the website in the show notes, and also to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And so whether you are in the UK, in the US, Australia, or wherever else you're listening from, you could still follow Brittany, because as she said, she's posting more to increase awareness and sharing tips. So regardless of where you are, do follow her, because I'm sure that you will get some valuable information from what she shares. So thank
Yes.
you, Brittany. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.
It was, and it's a very important conversation. And I think we need to have more of these conversations.
Yes.
Definitely. Yes, I do think we need to have more, because I do think that it's something that often, I think we go through phases where you may hear a lot about it because there'll be a case that makes the headlines, news headline. Then you might not hear nothing for a long time, but it's still something that's happening, as the data shows. So I think continuing to have these sorts of conversations is important. So thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do to support people that are experiencing this.
Thank you.
Okay, listeners, thank you. Do go check Brittany out, follow her on LinkedIn, and if you are based in New York, go to the website and see how Brittany can support you. And if you are looking to increase your confidence, influence, and impact, if you haven't completed the free assessment on my website, go to aboundingsolutions.com. Under the free resources, there is an assessment that you can complete that will give you ideas about areas that you can focus on. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, do subscribe, and do share this episode as well, because we want more women to know about this. Until the next time, bye.